Hi, everyone.
Greetings all. In the Pure Worship book, Vivian has the book, I have the screen to read from. And this chapter is a new chapter. It is entitled,
I am against you, O GOG.
look at the picture that's at the top of this page. It's ominous, isn't it?
It's more modern day.
You didn't see these pictures in
Yeah.
glaring Technicolor in the old days.
Yeah,
Of a-
modern day guys with guns and
Looks like the occupation of a Western city somehow, but that's they're trying to set a mood here. And the mood is, of course, based on, they say, their narrative about who GOG of MAGOG is. That basically it's an attack upon God's people. And they've changed their interpretation of this over the years. So let's see what they have to say about GOG of MAGOG nowadays. So we're reading.
their focus is explaining the identity of both GOG and the land that he invades. And we should note that they've switched from the previous chapter was all about Ezekiel chapter 9. This one is chapter 38. So you never get the flow of Ezekiel if you're reading this book.
Yeah, well, just a couple of months ago we were in chapters 40 to 48 for a while. Remember,
Yeah,
just the temple? And that's the end of the way God constructs the book. That's the end. You have it in the middle of the book.
Yeah.
Then you go to chapter 9. You're back in the destruction of Jerusalem. And now you're back into the eschatological chapters, which are 36 through 39. But you're jumping in at 38.
Yeah.
What happened to 36 and 37?
Yeah. So I think you have to watch for this. Watch when you're reading their publications how they don't put things in sequence. And there's a reason they do that. It's to obscure what you would get if you were reading it in sequence. So this is about Israel, the nation of Israel, the redemption of the nation of Israel. That's what Ezekiel's about.
If you doubt that, just read the last 13 chapters from 36 to 48 and see what you think. What does it say when you just read it in sequence? And what do they say it says? And we're going to see a really good example of how they have to break the book to pieces here to get the preferred narrative out of it about themselves. So why don't we start with the 3 paragraphs? I'm going to be reading from the screen. I'll start off. I am against you, O GOG. Now we should say there's only a fragment of a verse here, and that's going to be significant as we look at what else they cite in here as reference verses. Ezekiel 38 verse 3, but only this one clause, I am against you, O GOG, and they say the focus of that is explaining the identity of both GOG and the land that he invades. The first paragraph says, for thousands of years, this earth has been stained with the blood of human warfare, including the bloodbath that marked the 2 world wars of the 20th century. But the greatest war of all human history is just ahead. This war, however, will not be merely a human conflict with earthly nations fighting one another only for selfish reasons. Rather, this coming war will be the war of the great day of God the Almighty. That's Revelation 16:14, of course. The only time in the Bible, that chapter, that Armageddon is ever mentioned by name. They've made an equation, therefore, that GOG of Magog is somehow about Armageddon. Provoking this war, an arrogant enemy will invade, notice this, an arrogant enemy will invade a land precious to God. That invasion will cause the sovereign Lord Jehovah to unleash the greatest demonstration of his destructive power ever seen on earth.
Some key questions naturally arise. Who is this enemy? What land will he invade? When, why, and how will he invade this land? Since these future events will involve us, Jehovah's pure worshippers on earth, we need to know the answers. We can find them in a thrilling prophecy recorded in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39.
Notice how they set you up already. These involve us.
Yeah.
That's not what the text says, but we'll get to that in a second. The enemy, the subhead, the enemy, GOG of Magog. And then they tell you to read Ezekiel 38, 1 and 2. They've already read 3, a fragment of it. Verse 8, verse 18, and then 2 verses from 39, 4 and 11. So 7 verses out of 52 verses in the 2
Partial
chapters.
verses.
And they're partial verses, or fragments, yeah.
Yeah.
And then they say about these verses in general, here is the gist of the prophecy. In the final part of the years, that's a quote, one phrase, in the final part of the years, an enemy called GOG of MAGOG, and that's a quote, GOG of MAGOG, except there's an ellipsis in the middle of it, which we'll get to in a minute when we read the actual verse. GOG of ... MAGOG invades, quote, the land, two words, unquote, of God's people. But that vicious attack causes Jehovah's, quote, great rage, two words, unquote, to flare up, and Jehovah steps in and defeats Gog. Victorious, Jehovah gives his defeated enemy and all those with him, quote, as food to all kinds of birds of prey and the wild beasts. Well, that's a longer clause, unquote. Finally, Jehovah gives Gog, quote, a burial place, three words, unquote. To understand how this prophecy will be fulfilled in the near future, again, just ahead, as they said before, in the near future, we first need to identify Gog. I would submit that you can't do anything to get the gist of a prophecy, because God gives you the gist. It's his words. That's what he wants you to pay attention to. You can't get the gist of it by getting fragments of 7 verses out of 52.
And they don't even put these verses in sequence.
No.
So it's pretty...
They're displaced, in other words. They're not even in the order within the chapters.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at what the verses actually say, these 7 verses. So we start with 38, 1 to 3. Let's read them in context.
The word of Jehovah again came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against, the part they quote, Gog of, that's the only part, the land of, again, Magog.
What was missing then?
So the land of.
The land was missing, so
The
it's
land
Gog
of
of Magog. Right.
The head chief of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him.
So we have a description of who Gog is right here.
Yeah.
And there's a geography attached to Gog. It's not just an enemy.
But you've left out all those details.
Yeah.
Then in verse 3, say, this is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says. Here, and then this is the part they quote, I am against you, O Gog. End of their quote. And then it says, head chieftain of Meshech and Tubal. That's the part you left out.
So twice in 3 verses you have who this Gog is. It's something to do with a place on earth.
Yeah.
It's not just a spiritual enemy or a general enemy. He's identified with Meshech and Tubal. Those are actually places that you can find in any Bible dictionary. So right away you know something's wrong. The geography has been left out of this. And then they quote verse 8 partially.
Right. So 8 begins, you will be given attention after many days. That part they don't have. This is the part they quote. In the final part of the years. End of what they quote. You will invade the land whose people have been restored from the ravages of the sword, collected together out of many peoples onto the mountains of Israel, which had long been lying devastated. The inhabitants of this land were restored from the peoples, and all of them dwell in security. So the identity of the people is taken away from you.
It tells you who the people are that are gathered. It tells you who's being attacked. It also tells you the condition of the land before they were gathered. There was a continual waste, which everybody knows was the condition of the land of Israel till the last century, really. It tells you all you really need to know about who's being invaded and where Gog is coming from. The furthest part of the north comes in later. We'll get to that in our next video where we deal with the whole chapter.
This was the displaced one. They put this at the beginning when they have their paragraph in their publication.
Yeah. All right. So these people are restored, gathered, and the continual wasted land is now being recovered, and it's all in the mountains of Israel. Then they skip down over 10 verses now to verse 18 to get their next idea.
On that day, the day when Gog invades and then they've got their quote, land of, end of their quote, Israel. So they leave out Israel. Declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah. My, they quote, great rage, end of quote, will flare up. That's all.
That's all.
That.
So we'll fill in some of the blanks next time, but it's enough to know what they're leaving out consistently here. All the geographical references.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also have two verses from 39,
right.
verses 4 and 11.
4 says, on the mountains of Israel you will fall, you and all your troops and the peoples who will be with you. I will give you, all of that was not in their quote, and this is the part they have, as food to all kinds of birds of prey and wild beasts, end of their part of the quote, of the field.
So interestingly, the longest clause they quote is about the birds of prey preying upon the dead. That's the longest part they quote of any of the. They don't mention who. The fragments.
And the mountains of Israel.
So they want you to apparently see a very viscerally affecting picture here, namely that all of the enemies of God's people are going to be the food of. They're going to be carrion really on the surface of the ground. They want you to see that, but they don't want you to see any of the local references.
Mm-hmm. And the people identified.
Yeah, and then finally, verse 11, they have they've only partially quoted it.
Well, they've got 3 words out of a lot of words here. Okay, on that day I will give Gog, their part of the quote, a burial place. End of the quote completely of that verse. But the verse continues, there in Israel, in the valley of those who travel east of the sea, and it will block the path of those passing through. That is where they will bury Gog and all his hordes, and they will call it the valley of Hamon-Gog.
So even from the 7 verses they select for you, and only partially quote, even from those 7 verses, if you just believe what the verses say in their entirety, what picture would you have?
Not the one that they give you in this paragraph, so they're counting on you not looking them up.
And if you do, if you dare to look them up, and I'm sure some witnesses will faithfully try to look up all the references, you will twist them all in the direction of your narrative, because that's all you have to go on. You don't have the full context of the chapters even, let alone the flow of the book. Yeah. And this is what's so insidious and deceptive about this. You have to know that the person's writing this, and it's a committee generally, are deliberately leaving out that which changes the entire picture.
To pick so selectively and so few words, I don't remember it being as bad as this in our day, but maybe it was, and we just weren't aware of it. But I can see that this is just a terrible manipulation of Scripture to get their narrative in your head.
Maybe you'd be enraged if you read "The Nations Shall Know That I Am Jehovah" by Fred France. Maybe you would nowadays.
Yeah.
But back then you wouldn't have noticed the manipulation.
What I didn't notice in that book was the chapters that he just left out.
Chapters, entire chapters.
Whole chapters.
Yeah. But this kind of, what can we call it, confirmation bias, where you only take the phrases that are useful to your story.
So you miss what the book of Ezekiel is really about.
Yeah. It's evil.
Yeah, it's about the name and the nation.
Yeah, the whole book, as I found out by reading it for the very first time without my Watchtower glasses some 37 or 40 years ago, the whole book is about the name and the name's relation to a nation.
And how it's God's actions that vindicate his name.
Yeah, we're going to see that more clearly in the next video. We're going to do the whole chapter next time just to show you what they do with the rest of it. Yeah. I'm pretty sure they're going to go back to some of these verses and plunder them for more of the goods.
I like that you talked about something about like cracked up into little pieces, because it makes me always think of Humpty Dumpty has been something that we've talked about a lot, in that's the way the Watchtower does their analysis. They take bits and pieces like Humpty Dumpty once he's fallen.
Fallen
all these
off the
little
wall.
bits of pieces, but they can't put them back together again. So it always makes me think of that little rhyme.
But they're not stopping trying to put it back together again
Yeah.
to suit their own
Yeah.
very self-interested narrative.
But it's not an egg the way it should be. It's scrambled for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
What's your link?
We're doing a link to our Paradise Lost series on Ezekiel chapter 36. How can fleshly Israel vindicate Yahweh?
Yeah, we challenge everybody out there who has any doubt at all about whether they're telling the truth or we're telling the truth, representing the book of Ezekiel faithfully. Just read 36 through 39, because they're going to be talking about 38 and 39 now, but without much reference to what just came before, 36 to 37.
We'll read in context next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See you then.